You're listening to WeDeepen Media.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Deepen with Christina. I'm your host, Christina Weber, founder and CEO of WeDeepen, Feminine Weapon, and also a certified professional love coach. WeDeepen's mission is to inspire more meaningful, loving relationships. And we do this through sharing the greatest social and transformational experiences. We curate them on the calendar that you can check out at WeDeepen.com. These are brands and facilitators that we have come to know and trust that can help you to deepen into yourself and to deepen into connection with one another. You'll see all types of workshops, events, festivals, retreats, more to add in 2023. In the top right-hand corner at WeDeepen.com, when you are on that calendar, you can sign up to become a member, and then you will receive a weekly email every Thursday that gives you a digest of everything that's happening and going on within the WeDeepen ecosystem. There are about 400 members there right now, all early adapters, so make sure you go in and join. It's free at the moment. WeDeepen has recently expanded to include a private matchmaking and relationship coaching division. Private matchmaking is for anybody who feels this sense of readiness, ready to create family for a life partnership, to deepen into intimacy, significant intimacy with another. We will go out and recruit, make introductions. We understand that attraction is super personal, and we are interested in working with people who put growth first. That's essentially this network. It's all types of people who put growth and relationship people first. This episode today is a really special one. I bring together two people that I admire immensely in this world. Charles Eisenstein is a philosopher. He is the author of many books, including The More Beautiful World Our Heart Knows Possible, Sacred Economics, The Ascent of Humanity, Climate, A New Story, The Quarantine. I have enjoyed deepening into Charles's work for the past decade. Many of you, I imagine, are aware of his genius. Aspen is an advisor and investor in WeDeepen. I know that she was a fan of Charles, so I invited her into this conversation. And it's a perfect time for you listeners to meet Aspen. Aspen is a brilliant entrepreneur. She built and sold her first company, and WeDeepen was one of her first investments. Now she is an advisor not only in WeDeepen, but social impact companies that are making a difference in the world through her organization called For the Many. The podcast begins with Aspen sharing a story of how she was supposed to meet Charles at an event during the height of the pandemic. Actually, I wouldn't even say that it was necessarily the height of the pandemic. It was as we were coming out of the pandemic. And she had this experience where she showed up to the event and expected to see Charles, who was not there. Please listen to this episode with an open heart and an open mind. Some of the things that you hear you may not agree with, and it may give you the ability to dive deeper into what you believe to be true. We are in it for the deep conversations and change your mind. This episode is about 2 hours long. I do suggest that you listen to the full thing to get the complete experience of the genius of both of these two individuals. So pause it, come back to it. And at the end, I ask Charles about 4 people who I see are catalysts for change this lifetime. They have viewpoints that sometimes are known as positive, negative, very interesting, eclectic, unique beings. Kanye West, or Ye, David Icke, Daryl Davis, and Elon Musk. I have this fantasy that Charles Eisenstein will be featured on the news programs, that he will be a called correspondent to comment on current events. And this is my first peek at making that happen. Last thing before I roll over into the podcast, if you do enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, follow, rate it on Spotify, or if you're listening on Apple. It helps me to continue to record and helps more people to discover it. Okay, I can't wait to see you in person, and make sure to go to that calendar, because while I do enjoy talking to you in this way, I really geek out in connecting you with other people and meeting you in real life. Enjoy this episode. Thank you.
I'm going to mention in this the one anecdote that I had shared with you, Christina. So just to the room, whether or not they want to share that with the space. So I got into film thinking, okay, art.
Right, at least money won't be involved in that, right? Profit margins, that has nothing to do with art.
Right, like people will story tell. And I moved up in that industry quite quickly and became this role called an AD, where you're supporting the director, the cinematographer, and every minute is money. Like everyone, you're renting equipment, you're renting people as far as the production is concerned. And so I was disenchanted fairly quickly. And I thought to myself, okay, well, what can I affect here? And I was on one set that was particularly, I would say abusive in a sense, that they had so much money that people were working 16-hour days and they just kept throwing more money at it. And I thought, I could help people if I could help with a lot of this paperwork. And so I thought, this is what I'm going to do. If I start my own company, then I can start being free of this whole idea of money and all these things. So I knew nothing about tech, launched a Kickstarter campaign, learned a lot about business, spoke with heads and CEOs of studios and payroll companies, and sat at tables being like, if we do this together, like if there's only one login, like I don't need to own this tech. Like if we do this together, we'll be learning from more people together and build something greater than we could ever do alone. And that particular CEO who was like, yes, then went and sort of got us blacklisted for a little bit and stole a few of the shows that I'd been like, we have these next 3 shows, let's do them together. Which is very naive in the world. And so that company was then acquired in a year and a half by one of the largest payroll companies, the only one that would sign an NDA. So I thought, okay, I can trust these people. And they were wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot. I became director of new product development. And around that time, I met Christina. And also around that time, I'd been invited to Mountain Film Festival. And I was in a car for 4 hours with this kid who grows mushrooms, who was just going on. And we were talking and just felt so the same about the earth and money and all these things. He's like, you have to read Charles Eisenstein. Like, you have to read Sacred Economics. Just went on and on. And so he couldn't get through a sentence without saying your name. So,
is his name William?
What was that?
No. Okay.
No, it was
I know another young guy who's like, okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I hope one day you can meet, because that would be his dream. So I started looking into your work. I read Sacred Economics, and it really, I just remember the first few chapters really hitting my heart, because to go from having had so little growing up in a monetary measurement, let's say, to having what some people would consider, wow, now you're officially wealthy. You've done the thing. You've won the lottery. I had never been more afraid of losing money. I would say to people, what's worse than getting money? Losing all of it, getting a lot and then losing it. And so it was confusing. And I went through a time of, okay, well, feeling something outside me gave me this money. Really, I was still propagating this idea of, thinking, spirit and the universe and everything's all connected. Somehow I'm disconnected from it. And so I got this money, so I have to give it away. I have to do good with it, and I have to give it away, or do good, or what am I supposed to do with this? And so I began meeting with different companies that I felt were here for human connection, sustainability. Really, I felt that if whatever happened, if I gave them money a little a little good would be impacted in the world. And so that's when I met Christina. And and fast forward to actually meeting you as I was traveling with a company I was advising briefly at a place called True North. And you had a beautiful like spoken word that you shared. And the next day I was invited to this little dinner at a place called the Waterfall House. And this is the thing I was going to share prior to recording, but I'm fine with it going into the world, but at everybody's discretion. And so I was so excited. I mean, I was going to meet Charles Eisenstein and Zach Bush. So after leaving that position at that company, I ended up moving into a van. And I said to people, I just feel the soil calling. And so I traveled in a Sprinter van for 2 years to different communities to just try to learn about community, learn about earth, learn about soil. And so naturally I got into Zach Bush as well. And I mean, I feel nervousness in my body, even just remembering the feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm going to get to meet them both, like really meet them at this dinner. And then they required that we take a COVID test. And I was like, this is really weird. This is like natural law. I can't believe they're asking for COVID.
That's why I didn't go. In fact,
I was so confused.
Yeah.
I know. So this is the story I have of you. So I take it because why? This comes back to, I think, scarcity in relationships. I take it because, well, Charles Eisenstein and Zach Bush are coming and they're taking the test. So I guess I should just do this. Like, I guess it's not a philosophical slippery slope.
Like,
you know,
the reason I didn't take it, I mean, I don't care really. I mean, who cares? It's just like something they stick up your nose. But I didn't want to like have the impact that you just described of normalizing it,
Yes. And I love that. And it was so fascinating because then they told me, oh, this is so, thank you. This is so good. So then they mentioned, Charles Eisenstein wouldn't take the test. And so he's not coming. So at some point, and I was just like, Sam, that hero, I totally get it. I totally get it. Here I am saying, okay, I'll take a test for how willing am I to abandon myself for the sake of some idea of authority or hero or pedestaling of other, right? Above my own alignment to what I believe creates more connection rather than disconnection in this world. And I was sitting down by the waterfall and looking at the glistening water. And I was just thinking, we were all down there and someone came over, I won't mention names. And I was just in the gratitude of you. Honestly, I was just in this gratitude of this human who really had the courage to stand for something, even amidst this little tight-knit group.
That I refused the test because like maybe it was because I was self-righteous and sanctimonious and thought I was better than everybody else. And I'm not going to do that. Like, how it's interesting. I mean, like you could have interpreted it that way too. I could have. And I think there were mixed emotions in the space. Right. And so I'm sitting there by the water and someone comes over and they're like, wow, can you believe this? Like, it's just a test. Who cares? But I was just so deep in the gratitude and not in any kind of push or pull. I was just like, wow, for me, this was my experience. And then I shared with them what I was feeling. And also that, like, what if it's hundreds of people in a space that take a test for Charles Eisenstein? What if it's thousands of people in a space that take a test for Charles? Like, and what if it's not Charles Eisenstein? What if it's somebody else, right? Like, how far are we willing to go? And it was so beautiful, I felt, because this person came in with that, like, and I was just in such deep gratitude, and they couldn't puncture my awe, and so that was so beautiful. And so after, this is the really funny part. So after I spoke with my friend Travis, he works with a man named Michael Tellinger in Ubuntu Contributionism. And so I was telling him, oh my God, you're so amazing. Charles Eisenstein didn't take the test, but he didn't go, And he goes, wow, he chose a different timeline. Like, I wonder what happened on his timeline. I wonder what series of things happened. And so 3 or 4 days later, we find out Joshua, one of the co-founders, had COVID, even though he took the test.
This isn't really that funny, but, and then so a few people got COVID. And so then I joked with Travis, you know what? He chose the timeline where he didn't get COVID.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to tell you that all this time I've been holding that. One day I'm going to be able to share that with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my context of you. And I'm just so grateful to be here in conversation.
Well, thank you for that story. I'm a little chagrined that people were, interpreting it in negative ways. I didn't really want to even make a big deal about it. I was just like, that isn't my ritual. I'm not, it is kind of like a timeline actually, because the rituals that we perform reify the worldview and the state of being that they're part of. Like, rituals are powerful, and that, like, I see all of that stuff through a ritualistic lens. You're taking a magic wand and you're moistening it with your body fluids, and then you're subjecting it to a divination process that's been created by priests to determine whether an invisible spirit has possessed you. Like, it's ritualistic through and through. And I'm like, at some point, and I'm not like so hard line that, that I've never taken a COVID test to travel. Like I did a couple times, but by the time that this happened, I was like, no, that's just not my ritual anymore. And it really didn't have like any kind of judgment or self-righteousness, but it's such a wide projection screen for people to impute either contemptible or heroic motives to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it really is, I find this, I have this theory, which I think is just my words for something that is knowledge or understood in psychotherapy or something, but that the formulas that I project or witness are happening in others are the formulas that I actually use with myself in my own mind, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to imagine them practicing something a certain way. And so I really feel like this whole experience test, no test, has been this wonderful lens to more poignantly illuminate the formulas of others, but also really where our formulas are, like how we're seeing their actions through our own formulas. And so I guess what I mean by that, and this feels very on topic, is, I would feel there is a sense of belonging and acceptance. I shared with Christina when she offered that I join this, I said, yes, I'm definitely going to say yes. And also I'm scared that, which you're so sweet, Christina, at the beginning of this call, you say or so, it's totally fine. I'm scared that I'm going to say a lot. I'm scared that I don't have the vocabulary. I mean, I literally have like words that I'm like, let me build up my vocabulary in the next 30 days before I have this conversation with Charles Eisenstein. And so that is, in a way that's endearing. And also there is a sense of belonging, a fear of not being liked, a fear of rejection, a fear of, and because this is such a, a loving, safe space, that dissolves immediately. And also, I think it takes, as you mentioned, Christina, courage to let everyone have their own experience and their own judgment of it, and really hold steadfast that is about them projecting it. Like, anybody who thinks you are being righteous has the formula of doing things for the sake of righteousness. Like, that's not something that my brain didn't even go there, and perhaps because but I would say a lot of those people were exposed to your work. And that's not a judgment. I actually know for myself, I've spent a lot of time with that, especially in having led an organization. I realized that righteousness for me is always a red flag. Like, that means my ego. If I think I'm defending them because of this, and it's always a red flag for me. And so it's taken a lot to rewire that and dissolve that. And so I think that's I mean, I just want to invite that as a topic, where do we, like me learning vocabulary words, at what point is that having compassion for what creates safety for myself and my inherent want to belong? And where is it that I'm now moved by fear?
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine it's different for everybody. But I just wonder, like, at what point do we draw the line of the fear of not being accepted or the fear of not being liked and standing for how we move forward in the world?
Well, I would like to respond, but Christina hasn't had a chance to say anything. So maybe let's see.
Well, part of inviting Aspen into this conversation and knowing how much she resonates with your work as well was an opportunity for me to gift this experience and to be in awe and witness of the conversation as it unfolds. And, we did push record at a moment in time as you two were making introductions, and I will be recording an opening to this podcast. We get to decide again as what we put out on the road. I'm totally open with putting the whole entire conversation out into the space. And because we just, as we started pushing recording, we were still also even setting our container. So one of the first things I want to ask is, we scheduled an hour and 15 minutes for this conversation. And I want to add, are there any like deep hard stops if we end up going a little bit over? Okay, great. So I guess if just throwing out intentions for this podcast is the real unfolding of a genuine conversation. I am really curious, Charles, to, I think we can go into definitely the philosophy and the theories and the concepts that we think, but I'm also really curious of getting into more of like your own human experience, which I think is great. Aspen, you almost invited in of like your own, because I hear you talk a lot about belonging, and I wonder, how do you find a sense of belonging? And that's even what Aspen is, I believe, of grappling with too, is each of us are in a world that there's right and wrong and good and bad, and positive and negative, and being able to speak our own individual experiences as we're all still learning in every moment. And also being fearful of like, if I say one thing and then somebody listens to it an hour later, like I have the right to change my mind at any time. And so not even locking us into these moments and feelings and thoughts. So partly of me, I love that, Aspen invited in this conversation, and Charles, I'm interested in responding. And I think we just let a conversation unfold and see where that leads. And I'd also love to, Charles, before you jump into answering Aspen's question, what is your intention for this time with us together?
My intention is to play with you, and serve whatever conversation wants to unfold. I don't have any particular, points I want to make. I'm just happy to be here. And, whenever I'm asked what my intention is, I always wonder, is this an invitation to set an intention that I don't already have, or is it simply to reveal the intention that I actually have? And those can be two very different things. Often if I'm in a group where people are invited to speak their intention, I notice them kind of searching for something that is spiritually acceptable in a way, which often translates into socially acceptable. But is that really their intention? Like if they revealed, and there's usually more than one intention, like if they reveal their true intentions, it may not be so pretty. And it can be really hard actually for me to honestly distinguish what my true intentions are. And there's a mix of, shadow intentions in there. Like maybe one of my intentions is that you and your audience will like me because I'm scared of the crowd. I'm scared of the mob. I'm scared of being the weird kid. And so I want everybody to like me, and maybe there's psychology going back to my childhood there. Maybe there's something of that in it. So should I state that as my intention for this conversation? To manipulate you into liking me. That's my intention. Okay. And okay, obviously obviously that's not my entire intention. But if I'm really being honest, there's probably something of that in there. And then there's also what might seem like very noble intentions to transmit and serve an energy that I carry and that I'm representing in the world, and a future, a timeline that I've seen and that I know well, and I can speak from it. And I want to transmit that on behalf of this beautiful possibility for humanity. And I pray that my words are animated by that being and that they are effective in its service. Like that would be another intention. And for that intention to manifest, because it is a constant orientation, any conversation topic can be its vehicle, because it's not even like you mentioned, like memorizing vocabulary words, which is very adorable. And I think you identified kind of where it comes from, a desire to be accepted, but also maybe a desire to be effective. And like precise vocabulary can be a useful tool, but it's not really where the power of verbal expression comes from. It comes from the heart. And I think like a lot of people could hear, like your voice is very open. Like it's like a very open conduit of your emotions, at least how I've experienced it in this conversation. It's vulnerable to like display your heart in that way. And that in itself is a transmission that I really appreciate. And it makes me trust you. You're not hiding anything, maybe because you can't hide anything. It's just like, there it is. There you are. There you are. And I feel like the world would be a better place if we trusted that. And undid some of these habits of hiding from each other, which are not bad habits. In the economy that you described in your earlier story about, exploring medicine, surely money is not a big factor in medicine. Okay, what about art? And finding it everywhere, this pervasive atmosphere of everybody's trying to extract something from me. That's kind of what capitalism is. Everyone's trying to get the best deal. You're not on my side. That's the economics of supply and demand. And we are in a kind of an opposition that maybe works out to everybody's greater good if things are working well. But, fundamentally, I'm trying to get the best deal. I'm trying to get the best price. You're trying to get the best price. And so this habit of protection, of guarding, of hiding is absolutely necessary in the current system. You can't just reveal, wide open reveal what you're thinking to the person you're negotiating with. You have to be guarded. And this isn't just an economic thing. It's also in our social relations. We don't, like the reason we don't feel safe and we have habits of guarding and hiding, that comes from real experiences, But then sometimes these habits get frozen in place. And when we are in a safe container, in a safe relationship, then it takes maybe a little bit of will to relax those and to dare to accept that this is a bubble of a new reality. This is in the flow of time toward a different future and a different world. And okay, yeah, let's relax into that and anchor that reality into the world, in this relationship, in this moment, and carry that forward so that we're able to speak from that. And that's how the transmission comes. It comes through the experience of it in our bodies. Yeah.
When you were speaking, I felt this sense of permission wash over me in terms of, oh, right, it's natural to this habituation of hiding, of protecting, and I think there's, in relationship, in the idea of social relationships, and the way I feel and cultivate trust with others is, well, be truthful. Like in the moment, please be truthful. And also, and so, I'm not expecting that these questions have answers. I'm just throwing them out there. Can we really be all of ourselves with another? And especially in the getting to know of somebody. I think I've had this feeling of a fear in my own experience of, especially an intimate relationship. I don't want this fear of, which is probably my own formula, people pleasing formula, but of being manipulated by the other, right? Of oh, they're only showing me some part, but vice versa. And yeah, I guess we can only be as truthful as we feel safe to be.
Yeah. And there's a trust there that maybe that there's some parts that are not safe to reveal and some that are, and those might be different parts for different people. And then there's that moment where it's kind of on the edge, and you really have to feel into, okay, it's not even a question of safety, because sometimes there is some risk there. There's an unknown. But but it's not reckless, and am I ready? Am I ready to enter into the new level of, really what you're talking about is intimacy, of seeing and being seen. And this trust in your instinct to reveal or not reveal is really important, because again, if you just are totally open and trusting of everybody, what happens when you get the email from the Nigerian prince, or the all these scams and stuff. They take advantage of people, have this pent up desire to trust, actually. And that can be manipulated. And we're surrounded by people, including ourselves, who have been damaged in various ways. And so they are not trustworthy. And I'm sure there's a lot of gender dynamics here too. As a woman, there's a whole additional level of guarding and self-protection that has become necessary in patriarchy, where women are objectified. So anybody who's seeing you through the lens of objectification will not be able to fully accept your humanity. That doesn't fit into the lens. So there's no shortcuts, to this, or easy answers, but it's a long healing process. Yeah.
Charles, as I was preparing for this conversation with you, I listened to an episode that you did on remembering, belonging or coming home, and you spoke about that there's a crisis of belonging. And there was something inside of that episode that you had said, and I don't know if I interpreted it correctly, but you said something about love and consciousness is an illusion, or something around love, like the illusion of it.
I'm not sure what I was talking about. I don't think I would say that love and consciousness are illusions, but I'm wondering what I was getting at there.
Okay. And where it took me. So I, over a decade ago, I was studying Kabbalah in the Kabbalah Center in New York City. And I found that for me, when I'm on when I tend to be on the outsides of, the spiritual beliefs and the religious beliefs, that's like perfect for me. It's like, stay on the outside, don't go on the inside. So I know it's other people have had experiences of the Kabbalah Center of getting so deep inside, and then there's a lot of darkness. However, for me, I've remained on the outside, and some of it that this wisdom that I took in, and there was one thing that I've lived by ever since, and it's desire to receive for the sake of sharing. The more that I have, the more that I give. And I remember one of my teachers at the time, over a decade ago, I was, saying, I don't care about being rich. Like, I don't care. And he, stopped me. He's like, well, Christina, that the more that you have, the more that you can give. And I have interpreted that as, okay, yeah, that's money, that's resources, that's connections, that's like, there's so much within that side of that beyond the money exchange. And so for years I've struggled actually with I understand why we get on a plane and you put your own face mask on first. And at the same time, I struggle with the concept too, because if there is a village and a town and everybody is essentially putting everybody else's needs before their own needs, they never have to worry about their own needs. And, that's kind of, we're just all in this living contribution to one another. And that's what I want to play. I would love to play that game. And I would love to even start, because I think in a romantic relationship, you start at least with one other person, find one other person that's willing to play that game with you. And then hopefully eventually that can expand out into a community and more people, but you never have to work. And it doesn't mean that, you don't go to yoga or you don't take care of yourself, because you're taking care of yourself essentially so you can be more in service to other people. And when I just heard you say and I know, I don't know how to, like, you just said something about well, other people are damaged. Are there other people out there who have been? And when I say, when it's kind of truth, it's like almost in the spiritual community, nobody's damaged, nobody's broken. However, the stories that we hear of manipulation and the evil of the world, like that's real. There is real concern out there. So I guess the reconciling, and I know you kind of brought up a little bit of discernment, and, the fifth agreement is discernment. But this dance, and I find myself also not only in romantic relationships, but also in business. I'm the founder of a company. I have a huge vision. I need to enroll other people to be part of this organization. And I'm very much directing a ship, and I've got to keep. And so I want to invite everybody into it and to share their gifts and all the things and all your, be in your magic. And I have I also need you to follow this specific job description. I may be going off in a little bit of tangents and multiple different directions, but those are all things of me reconciling as having this really wanting to live in this world of receiving for the sake of sharing, and how that ties into every aspect of my existence.
Okay. So it's not that, so you said one phrase I want to kind of zoom in on. That I think will be a key that unlocks a lot. You said something like, it's okay to receive because that will allow me to share. That's not quite it. That when you put it that way, it's like a justification or a way to allow yourself, or a way to give yourself permission. But if you look at it, a dog or a cat. I saw one walking in the background over there at Aspen's place.
Yep.
They don't go through that process of justification. But it is true that if you richly receive, you will be able to give more. That's true. But if you are using that as a way to get permission for yourself to receive, that is a kind of a scarcity mentality. It's like you're not fully accepting your full and equal place in the world and your right to take up space in the world. And that ties in a little bit to what you were saying about your company. You have been given a vision, as an entrepreneur, you have a relationship with that vision. You have a role to play in service to that vision. And if you step back from that because you need other people's or your own approval and permission, like, okay, it's okay for me to serve that vision as long as I give everybody else an equal say. Because otherwise I will be exercising power over and authority, and who gave me this authority, and I have to get everybody's agreement, and is it okay with you, and like all that kind of stuff. There may come a time where what you have to do in service to the vision involves, and I'm sure you've encountered this already, actually, involves imposing a decision against other people's objections. Might involve not being democratic about it, because at some point you have to choose what you serve. It might be doing something that makes you unpopular. It might be doing something that invites judgments against you, even self-judgments. So you see the link here. It comes from like this idea that, okay, it's okay to receive as long as I'm going to give. There's a distrust of oneself. That promise or that justification wouldn't be necessary if you absolutely trusted yourself and trusted that you are, in essence, a giving being, that you are, in essence, somebody who is here to contribute to to contribute to life and its unfolding, and to beauty, and to a beautiful future. Like if you deeply trusted that absolutely, then you would have no problem fully receiving, because you would know that is in service. You would trust yourself that, yeah, it's not, this resource isn't going to stagnate at this node here. That's not who I am. It wouldn't even be a concern. You wouldn't have to reassure yourself of that. So the fact that you feel like you want to reassure yourself of that, all that means is that there's maybe some healing to be done. And it could be very much around like this primal validation of your incarnation. Like it is okay to be here. I am here. In fact, it's even deeper than that. It's like, it doesn't even have to be okay to be here, because I am here. Your cat understands that very well. No question. It's not shy at all about getting what it needs.
It's so interesting because of so death.
Yeah.
There's death. Well, there's times of where I've had in the past where I've been in relationship, and when feelings of like the uncomfortable feelings of like jealousy or insecurity or things come up, I would just be like, well, you're going to die one day. And does any of this matter? So as you were speaking, there was moments of, I was feeling like, oh, I don't resonate. I actually desire to receive for the sake of sharing. But then I would come back to what you're saying. I'm like, but what he's saying is so true. And actually there's a message in here for me. So my brain was actually going back and forth like, oh, that's not, oh, okay. And then settling in within that. And then there is I guess, belonging when you take up space and you fully accept your vision or your role in this world is essentially what I guess creates the state of belonging. But then there's also this contradicting practice of unattachment and that I'm going to die in any moment. So don't be attached and don't hold, like I've never wanted to be somebody. I'll give you an example, and this might be too. There's a colleague of mine who has this concept that he was hosting this, experience. He doesn't want anybody else to host this experience, but he's not hosting the experience right now. And I helped to create this experience. And I'm like, okay, well, it's such a weird feeling to have, but like when he dies, we can host this experience. And so there's this like the belonging is taking place, but also the realization that we're all going to die we're all going to die anyway. So reconciling then our attachments, if that brings up any for you, it's just kind of rambling of thoughts.
So the, contemplation of death is not supposed to be a way to escape full participation in life. What it's supposed to do is to make life more precious because you're not under the delusion that it can be preserved. So the contemplation of death is very good. It's very powerful. It helps keep you honest. But the fact that this is all a play, all a drama, and that these roles are not truly ourselves, that doesn't mean that we're not supposed to fully engage the roles and, in a sense, be attached. Like we as in the supreme divine we created this so that we could enter into this play, enter into this drama with all of its attachment, with all of its love and all of its grief and its letting go. And that's why we're here. So to create it and then not fully step into it will make you sick eventually, because the soul yearns to play the role. But you can play the role better. So it's very much like if you're, in a stage production of some sort, and maybe it's, Hamlet or something. If in the middle of the performance, you're like, oh, hold on, you're not actually Hamlet, you're just some actor, and it doesn't really matter. This murder didn't really happen, and it doesn't really matter. If you say that, you're going to ruin the play. And you're even more than that, you're not going to go through the growth, the development that comes through your full participation in that play. Like the actors gain something from being in the play and devoting themselves fully to it. So it's the same with us. And because I'm like, the reason I'm well familiar with this, like this kind of stepping back from life and, oh, well, it doesn't matter. We're all going to die anyway. But we're here for it to matter, And when I actually go deep into a death meditation, which I've been doing sometimes through a breathing practice that I've been doing, Buteyko, it's called. It's named after this Russian guy, where it involves long withholding of the breath. So like the suffocation, the death fear kicks in, and God, this is getting pretty morbid here, but it does carry me to like a death process. and that moment where everything is going to be gone. I will no longer be in any of the roles that I've been in for years or maybe my whole life. It's kind of paradoxical, like that, having that experience doesn't make me less involved in the world. It just makes them so much more precious. Like every relationship that I have, every place that I'm in, it's so precious. I'm sure you've had this experience if a friend or if a loved one has passed away and you're like, oh, if only I had fully appreciated them when I had the chance in those moments, how precious it was. If only I'd realized that moment would never come back again. I have this also as my children grow up and they're never going to be babies again. Like that is gone forever. And if only I had realized it, really gotten it at the time, that fullness of experience and presence here in the world is one of the gifts that the knowledge that you're going to die can bring.
I appreciate this. Wow, I feel like we just hit a lot of topics in one exchange. Christina, when you were first talking, I was thinking, gosh, we're such mirrors. We really summon in our vibrational reflections to learn more about ourselves. And when I was expressing before the idea of having received a lot of money and wanting to give, there was this, the ideal that you presented of if we're all in a community and we're all giving, then our needs are taken care of. And a theme that's been recurring that I've been witnessing in people around me, and this I know is really a message for myself, is, but can we even let ourselves receive if we're so in the giving? And so as an example, the other day, my landmate, as she refers to herself, she got locked out of her car, lost her keys somewhere. And it's like 17 degrees out, really freezing last week. And I said, okay, no problem. I'll give you a ride there tomorrow. And she's like, okay, only if it doesn't bother your schedule. Or I was like, yeah, no, I have a window. She texts me in the morning, hey, I think I'm just going to get an Uber. I think I'm going to go. No problem. I'm like, no, really, my 12 p.m. canceled, so I can take you at that time. At 11:30, she texts and says, hey, no, I'm just going to get an Uber. It's just better if I go now. And I literally call her up and I say, listen, don't make it so hard for me to just give you this. You're making it more work. I'm driving you, deal with it, right? And the irony of this is that I had a second car here. My other car was at the mechanic and I needed a ride to the mechanic. So she ends up finding her keys. And then I say to her, my beautiful mirror that is in front of me, if you have time, if you could take me to the mechanic. If not, I can Uber. It's no big deal. And I literally watch myself. She's like, are you crazy? Like, I can take you to the mechanic. It's fine. And so what I mean by that is that even in a society of people who are giving, there's also a practice in the capacity, in the neuronal pathways, in what it means to receive, to allow the receival of. And that's an entire skill set. And there's something that has really helped me. It's a subtlety. And gosh, I really appreciate this, just the way you worded, Charles, if I give, it's okay to receive. Wow. I mean, it's funny how noble that sounds, right? And there's something that I realized it was hard for me to say, okay, it's okay to have all this money. It's okay to have all this money. It's okay to have. And then there was a mantra I shifted to of, I trust myself as a conduit for money, for energy, for exchange. I trust myself as a conduit. And And that really made me think, Christina, of you, I have this sister I was talking to last night who's in the middle of Mexico with these elders who, these people, like, they see a turkey in the woods, they accidentally hit a turkey with their car. They ask the turkey if they could take the life. The turkey says, okay. And then the turkey's head goes. It's like they're communicating with something otherworldly, or this worldly, just still connected to it. And she wants to support them, especially in the idea of plant medicine ceremony that in many ways, I trust it all, in many ways, nonetheless has been commercialized here in the States. And she wants to share how these people have helped her with more people. And I had a long call with her last night, and she's like, I just feel like when I'm asking for a certain amount of money or when I'm asking for something, it feels like commercializing. It feels like cheapening it. And meanwhile, like she's trying to share these people, right? There's no misintent. And also I understand the concept of feeling like we're cheapening something by putting a number on something that's immeasurable. And I think of you in this world, Christina, and your beingness. And I said to her, there's this, what I'm feeling from you is this sense of when I'm reaching out to people, like I'm a burden rather than I'm a gift. Like my beingness is a gift. And so it's funny because when I think of you, Christina, and everything you just shared, I want to receive to give. I think Christina's beingness is a gift. Like you wouldn't have to do anything. You wouldn't have to give anything. Just the light of you, your beingness in spaces gives so much. And so it's just, it's fascinating to me to see all of this. And I definitely, I've, in all the work I've done in terms of relationship, and I've shared this, I think, with you, Christina, but there was a while there where I was giving, whether it was money or energy or helping somebody with their career or whatever, because if they needed me, if I felt that they needed me, I felt that they wouldn't reject me, and I wouldn't have to look at the insecurities I had around just being worthy of love, just for my beingness, rather than trying to be needed by other. So I really, this world, I think the irony, this world of giving that we want to create also comes from the capacity we give ourselves to actually receive.
Yeah, it's a beautiful reflection. We can get very comfortable and accustomed to just being in the role of giver all the time, because it's actually a position of dominance. There's relations of dominance and submission that go along with gift, which is readily available in gift cultures. I remember I experienced some of that when I was living in Taiwan, way back in my 20s. And like there, if you went out to a meal with some people, you never, ever split the check. Someone would always pay. And in some settings, it was a matter of intense dispute who would get to pay. Because if you paid, then you were established as higher status, or it could just be that the other person kind of owes you one, which is also a form of status, like the creditor and the debtor. So in gift cultures, basically everybody's been giving to everybody else all the time, so everybody's in each other's debt. And in those cultures, if you refuse a gift, that is potentially a grave insult. If you go to somebody's house and they offer you a meal and you refuse, you're saying, I don't want to be in relationship with you. I don't want to owe you a meal. Mm-hmm. I don't want to host you when you come to my house. And I'm demonstrating that by refusing this gift so that I won't owe you one. And in our current society, like for very good reasons, we don't want to be in anybody's debt. because it's been used manipulatively and abusively. And so those habits can be very persistent. And I just love what you were saying about, it reminded about Christina, and like her being here is a gift. Like I had that learning on an ayahuasca journey many years ago, where we did this thing, state your intentions, and I was like, help me to be of better service to Gaia, whatever it takes, if it's a hard lesson, I'm ready for it. I just want to be of better service to Gaia. And what I received was, at the time I was like physically quite debilitated going into it. It's a whole long story. I was in intense fatigue from traveling too much and from giving more than I was receiving, thereby validating myself as someone who has permission to like himself and receive. But anyway, there I was. And my experience was just like kind of being held by a grandmother, saying just what you were saying, just being here is enough. We just want you to stay. Doesn't matter if you ever write another word or ever do anything that looks like giving to anybody else. Your presence here is already a gift. And, it's hard for me to receive that, because immediately my mind goes to, well, I could certainly abuse that. Does that mean I can just order everybody around, and expect them to bring me everything and not ever do anything? Like, it brings up like a lot of negative programming, which again comes to not trusting myself as somebody who naturally wants to do something. And there's so many ways that we can give to each other. It can be through washing dishes and giving massages, but it can also be through words, through the words that we speak when we see something and convey information that someone needs to hear at that moment. It can be through the quality of our hug. It can be through the softness of our gaze. It can be through our vision of the beauty and divinity of another person that they can feel in themselves when it is seen by somebody else. Like all of these, what happens when you're 90 years old? Should you just leave the planet because you're a burden? Or can you trust then that you are still a gift?
I want to go back a little to like as keeps getting brought up as because this principle that I feel of this desire to receive for the sake of sharing, it's not necessarily like it could go in the direction of like, oh, is that like a permission thing? But truly of like, if I had a principle that I could share with the world, that would be like one that I would invite people. It's not necessarily of the permission, but in the sense of what I see a lot, what keeps us separate is the desire to receive for the self alone. The house, the car, the fancy items, the new clothes. And if I even think of like of Kabbalah, one of the things in Shabbat is that on Friday, it was one of those things that if you want to go shopping for the nice outfit or a nice car, like if your beautiful car, or your house, if you get a multi-million-dollar house and that house is used to be shared with other people, whether other people are communing inside of it and building community, and it kind of comes back to this principle of like, of another thing is like this idea of sacrifice. So I've heard this quote of we must sacrifice for the shared life. And I found it interesting too, as I was even contemplating sacrifice recently, that is actually the Siddhi in Gene Key 13. I imagine you're familiar with the Gene Keys, Charles. Little. Okay. So Gene Key 19. So there's 64 gene keys, and Richard Rudd is the creator of this. Everybody who's listening, great book, the 64 Ways of Contemplation. And the shadow is codependency. The gift is sensitivity. And then the city, which is the highest version, is sacrifice. And it's sacrifice not in the low level sacrificing, but sacrificing our limiting beliefs, are the things that are holding us back from being connected to one another for the highest good of a community and a world and a land. And so it brings me to, like, if I think of love and the correlation of life, because, you know, I think that life and love maybe have a correlation in their definition, or how to potentially an idea of how we can live life. And so the definition of love that I have taken in is that it's a process of a continuation of eliminating the individual ego, the things that are holding you back from being the highest version of yourself, whether that's fears, negativity, judgment. So continuing process of removing the ego, combined with ever increasing acts of sharing. Because we do give to who we love. That is essentially the essence of love, is to give. And so that then the thing is, I guess sometimes, we crave love so much that maybe we do overgive, and we aren't practicing discernment, and they don't teach love in our, curriculums in school. And we haven't grown up in, I still remember the time personally that my dad at 17 years old, as my parents were separating, sat me on the steps and told me that he didn't love my mom anymore. And I remember years later I'm so confused about how can the man I love most not love the woman that love, who they then created me? This makes absolutely no sense. And only recently, as now 2 decades have passed since that moment. And I, kept poking at my dad recently and really, how do you not love mom? He's like, okay, yes, you're right. I do love her. But it's almost this confusion of relationship and love, just because of, they're not the same exact thing. So I wanted to throw that in on the conversation, and also see, when you think of love, of is that a similar definition? Is that, where does it, how does that differ?
Yeah. I hesitate to try to capture love inside a definition, but if I were to try, I think I said this in Sacred Economics even, love is the expansion of the self to include another. So that if that other is happy, you're happy. Makes you happy that the other's happy. If they're suffering, then you suffer. That's what I learned from having children, especially. They're part of me. We're not separate. That's what love is. Love is or it could also be the name of the feeling of that expansion, of that inclusion of another in the circle of self. And as far as sacrifice goes, I would actually even go back to, the big house, the multi-million-dollar house, but you're using it for community gatherings. So that's okay. But by contrast, what if you're not?
Well, okay. What if you're not? But I guess the reason that the thing is the driver, that's what I'm seeing it, the driver to get the big house, what motivates you, what inspires you is that, okay, if I, and maybe this is the reconciling in my head, but it's almost when I wake up in the morning, and what keeps me doing what I do with WeDeepen is almost this drive that if my being, my participation in life is in service to other people, then that's actually what gets me up in the morning. Otherwise, it's kind of one of the things where they say of if somebody's depressed, one of the first things to ask them is what are you doing for work? Like, how are you interconnected with a project or something that is bigger, that is serving others into the world? And it doesn't need to be in such a large scale. It can be, again, your children can be like, I guess that's what they say when someone becomes a parent, the driver increases for them to go and do and create in the world and to receive so they can provide for these children.
I'm thinking of a certain relative of mine who bought a 6,000 square foot house, which is really huge. You could fit, 3 of my houses into that. And he is not that social. He doesn't like to have people over, and he spends most of the time, as many people do in such houses, in like the breakfast nook and like the den, like in the small spaces. So the house isn't really meeting any of his needs, meeting the needs that drove the acquisition of the house to begin with. So I when I think of him, I feel like compassion, maybe almost pity, the same as I would feel for a thirsty person who keeps eating ice cream cones to assuage his thirst, not realizing that each ice cream cone makes him even thirstier. But the drive is still ultimately coming from love. It's been distorted into something that doesn't meet the love, but it's still coming from love. Like maybe if we really, I don't know, but if we excavated it, he wants, maybe the big house he associates that with success and respect. And he wants others to respect him because he now has a big house and they respect me. I've made it in the world. I'm successful. Maybe he really wants to know that about himself, by himself, of himself. He wants to love himself. And this is the implement that he needs to open a little sluiceway to allow the waters of self-love to come in. So, and maybe doing that will, watering his soul in that way will actually allow him to be more giving in the world. Like that's what it takes. So I guess I just don't see, ultimately, like on the soul level, I don't see that much difference between him and, somebody who has a big house and uses it for community gatherings in a way that more obviously serves love. Yeah, as I've gotten older, and I'm not like saying that I'm not trying to make an implicit judgment about you and what you think about it. But I guess as the older I get, the less judgmental I get, whereas in the past, I would have been a bit contemptuous of the people who use wealth in ways that I considered frivolous. And like this, at the same time, like I'm well aware that kind of consumption is destroying life on Earth. Like I'm well aware of that. Yet, I guess I just can't find it in me to condemn anything anymore. Yeah, I'm not sure how that plays into our conversation, but it came up. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. So, well, I want to invite into the conversation of the, so one of my fascinations and one of the reasons that WeDeepen exist is more healthy, meaningful, loving relationships. And that I see starts with the relationship of two. And romantic relationships generally here on Earth is, procreation. You could say that's how we continue to survive. And in regards to the conversation around scarcity, and Aspen, this was a little bit in some of your notes that you came through, and some that I'm curious about is, and understand that, yes, no judgment in any ways, choose and practice. But your thoughts on the idea of monogamy and polyamory?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's like a whole. I mean, I invented a witticism that I like to share, which is that polyamory just doesn't work outside of community, and neither does monogamy. So really, maybe the problem isn't our model of love so much as the context in which it's practiced, which is bereft of community. Wow. And there you are. If you're, living in monogamy in like a single family box among strangers who you see driving in and out of their garage, then like basically you have like a hot box, that becomes suffocating, and you don't have anybody else. Like all of your relationships and all of your shadow and everything is just in this echo chamber with one person. Whereas like there are many cultures on earth where, monogamy was the norm, but that didn't mean you spent 90% of your free time with your spouse. There were cultures where men and women hardly associate with each other at all outside the bedroom, and outside very limited occasions. The men spend most of their time with other men. Women spend most of their time with other women. And if you have some kind of problem, some kind of dispute, you don't have to process it with each other. There are many, many other people to process it with. And there are also, polyamorous societies that also have, if you try to do it in this culture, in this society, in this setup, then you have and you don't have access to community, then all of these bottled up traumas around scarcity and jealousy and stuff, they come up, and you end up only being able to process it with your partner. And that usually causes an explosion. What I saw, I spent a little time at Tamara a number of years ago, which is an eco-village in Portugal, that's dedicated to really deeply exploring. They don't say polyamory, it's more, they say love freed from fear, which for a lot of people expresses as polyamory, but not everybody actually. And there, if you have an attraction to somebody else and who's not your partner, and they still have partners there, most people are still in partnerships, even if they are polyamorous. And if you have an attraction to somebody else, and maybe you go off and you have an encounter, a sexual encounter with them, you don't necessarily come back and process it endlessly with your partner. Maybe your partner is sitting in a circle of women and you go to a circle of men, and everything gets processed there in an hour, whereas it would take 3 months if it were just you two. And then you go back together and it's fine. And because it's supported in community, it's normalized in community. Whereas in our default society, not only is it not normalized, but it's also loaded with all kinds of negative stereotypes and negative judgments. So it's really hard to do it. You have to exert tremendous effort and have a very strong vision and very strong conviction to practice polyamory outside of a community that holds it as normal or as good. And to speak of what is more natural for the human being or what's better for the human being, monogamy or polyamory, without talking about the context, it just leaves out so much of the picture. But there is a beauty in the idea, of non-possessiveness and sharing and openness. I really resonate with it. But to really and now, after a decade or two of this now there are pockets where it's much more normalized and there is some support and not just judgment. So this is maybe changing a little bit, especially with the absolute catastrophic breakdown of traditional marriage. It's not working, and it hasn't been working for pretty much the last 30 or 40 years, if not longer. So there's definitely a movement and a change in society that makes some of what I'm saying not quite as true anymore. Like some of the social skills around polyamory and holding it in community are starting to develop. But we're certainly not there yet. I mean, there's maybe pockets, like Western Massachusetts, Boulder, Colorado, like there's a few places where, but even in like Asheville, North Carolina, there's this joking reference to, we're Asheville poly. Asheville poly means that you're polyamorous in theory, but when it actually happens, then it turns out that you're not okay with it at all. So but I would just say we're in a process of flux and transition and breakdown, and who knows where it will take us.
I really see the interconnectedness between this question of polyamory or monogamy, or big house for community or big house for self, right? Like these ideas of pointing at something and saying that is the way or that is not the way, and towards what, and assuming that if we're saying it is the way or isn't the way towards something, means that we actually are somehow the definers or holder of the thing that we are intending to move towards. And it's almost like we know the finish line. And so the most direct route is here. And I think of a sister of mine who about a year ago was living with me, and she was looking for partnership, and she met someone, and she's going to listen to this, slept with him rather early on. And so, in my big sisterness, I was like, not sure that's the way. Right. And then a similar thing played out a few months later. And then in so much of the work that I'm doing and my own inner child work and unraveling of my judgment of my own path, which I think speaks to something you mentioned before, Charles, about condemning or not condemning, what people choose as the lily pad of their own trajectory. And I realize now, a year later, a similar thing arose with a different friend. And I thought, oh, cool. Yeah. And mostly because now I'm in such a place where I realize she was just reflecting back to me, a 20-year-old version of myself that I was still judging for thinking that way was not the way. But once I'm content with my own finish line of beingness of where I am now, which is ever evolving, but now that I realize that actually was the way towards cultivating a healthier relationship with myself, then I no longer judge that stepping stone. And so similarly, like what you were saying about, the man in his house, a theory I've been working with recently is that it's less about what we do and more about the story we tell ourselves about ourselves when we do it. And so it's not necessarily monogamy, polyamory, the big house, the community, the whatever. It's if it allows me to tell the story that confirms that I trust the goodness of my own heart, like just perpetually walking with, I trust the goodness of my own heart. And, same thing with anything, with plant medicine, with, I have many friends who have had interesting relationship with cannabis. And when they smoke, they're like, oh God, I'm doing a horrible thing. And then other people are like, no, this is pure medicine. And it really doesn't matter. It's just, what are you confirming about yourself as you do that? What's the story you're telling yourself? And is it one that's creating more goodness? And you said something before, Christina, about relationship. like it coming down to 2. And it's funny because I felt my body go, oh. And I know that we see eye to eye on this. And there's so many ways to look at things. And I do believe that we, through the reflection of both of you, through the reflection of anybody, through the reflection of my landmate and her Uber situation, I do get to know more of myself. And also, there's so much I'm learning through the relationship with myself. And so this really being how I'm being with my own inner child, how I'm communicating with myself, how I'm judging or not judging myself, and then being able to what you said before, that expand, like the expansion of self to include another. Like only in loving all these parts of myself that probably include so many faces of the collective can I then begin to expand to not place anybody's actions as a form of wrongness, and that's where I get really, when I hear, and I notice it, not that my experience is empirical data points, but I notice it more in the masculine, which I think would make sense based on the conditioning of protect, be strong, be the guardian. But this idea of like, no, that's dark, or no, there's objective morality, and no, there's objective truths and right and wrong. And I feel that it's this, when I'm responding to another and I'm pushing them away or thinking or judging their wrongness, I'm pushing away that part of myself. And so I just feel that with so many of these answers in relationship, there is no way. It's so unique to each of us. And I mean, I had some notes here, even on what you said before, the sacrifice. One of my mentors likes to call it our training. That allows me to separate it. Oh, this is my training. This isn't really me. So when I hear you say the city of sacrifice, I also equate that with, that's actually the reclaiming of self. Like when I sacrifice all this training and these ideas around what was taught that is actually separating from love. And you even said we don't teach love. And that's so interesting because I actually think so many of us understand that we understand love, but maybe we don't really, we teach these things that maybe aren't in alignment with, and we don't really teach the preservation of love in a society that is so conditioned to align us towards other incentivization structures. So I'm kind of going all over the place too, just because there's so much said. But it's interesting to have these questions of relationship, of what fosters healthy relationship, and it being each of us being a snowflake on our own journey of just, even the community, these people all being able to give me what I need. But the truth is only I can know what I really need. Like there's no other outside me. I mean, there's wonderful communication and I can constantly be excavating and learning more, but ultimately only I can really be there for all the desires of my inner child, of my own beingness. It's too multifaceted for anybody to be able to give me all of it. My dog wants to go outside. Okay.
I thought to end this podcast in asking you about specific people who most people are aware of in the mass population. And I understand in asking that question, it's almost asking, because there's this in my mind is like, well, thoughts, because we all have thoughts, and our thoughts judgment. When we speak and we share something, we're essentially sharing our viewpoints, and the viewpoints can be interpreted as judgments. And a reason why I wanted to ask you about these specific figureheads out there is because there's a relation to the rest of the world. It's almost like if I think of, so we have this bubble of community of quote unquote doing spiritual work, and yet it hasn't penetrated the masses. And so I see that spokespeople, like I could think of, oh my gosh, it would be great if Charles was a spokesperson, and that the nightly news called him and he would respond to different scenarios and situations. And then in my mind, I'm like, it would be great actually if Charles or somebody like Charles was president of the United States. And however, there's this level of participation that is of, well, because I toy with it at times, like, do I really want to be involved in this, or go build my own land, like go build my own community and separate myself from this world? So I guess in thinking of curious when I say something like, first off, that of this desire to see you speaking as being the expert that they call in to respond to these specific situations, would essentially be that you would be providing judgment on the current events that are happening in the world. But I also see that could be moving the needle forward if somebody like you was actually the one that they were calling, instead of the and I'll say this. I said this actually in the last podcast as well. I've recently, during the COVID period, I went home to Maryland, where I was raised, and I was right by DC, and I befriended the shadow senator of Washington, DC. It's a shadow senator because they don't have statehood, so they're the shadow senator. And I started sharing my beliefs with him, and I said one time, I said, Paul, the people that I hang out with most, they are really into, like, quote unquote transformational work. They're doing plant medicines. They have coaches. They're healing their inner woundings and diving deep into introspection. And what do you see happening with political leaders? And he just looked at me and laughed, and he said, oh, no, in the Senate, we just all throw our traumas against each other and just bang, 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 bang. So I guess of how do we really, is sometimes that we're overthinking, and not overthinking, but like, I don't want to speak because I don't want to cast judgment on something, also not necessarily moving the needle forward and not putting us in these positions of quote unquote power that actually creates a shift.
I'll try to bring all those things together. First, I'll just say, when I speak of judgment, I'm speaking of something very specific. What I mean by judgment is the belief that if I were you, I would not do as you were doing. I am made of better stuff. I wouldn't be doing that. Or it could even be a positive judgment. If I were you, you're doing much better than I would do if I were you in your situation. And that's a fundamental untruth, because if I were in your situation, how do I know? Like, how do I know what your situation is? The totality of all of the influences that bear upon you. I can't know that. I can't know that I would be any better or do any different. So that's what I mean by judgment. It's not the same as making discriminations, having opinions about things that are happening in the world, or about other people's motivations. Like, you can still try to understand somebody and have an opinion about it. So I'm not, like, I don't want to say that this would be another form of disengagement from the world, to be in this rarefied realm of no opinion about anything. So yeah, I've got my opinions. If NBC were calling me up for my opinion on the nightly news, we would be already in a very, very different society. So different that it wouldn't be necessary for me to be called by the NBC News. Like, it's like that. In the way things are right now, there's just no way that would happen without there being a huge transformation at NBC News. Just as, like, I would never be, well, for one thing, I'd make a terrible president, because lousy at organizing and managing things. But, even so, like the world would have to change an awful lot for somebody with my opinions to be president. And not just opinions, but my convictions and my ideals and my visions. So, yeah, that's, but I understand the wish. I feel it too when I meet people. I'm like, oh, if only this person were in charge. But the people in charge are mostly symptoms of the general state of society. They're the visible portion of the iceberg. They're barometers of the social climate. They are expressions of the collective shadow, for example. However, what your friend said about the Senate, and what you were saying about like the small spiritual community in contrast to the mass of society, I think that's changing. I've had a couple of recent experiences that confirm that, where one of them was speaking at the Fuller Field School in Kansas and seeing like how like these traditional like red state flyover zone people are having so much access to their emotions and to be able to cry in public and to like, be in the midst of a spiritual transformation. Like you wouldn't necessarily expect that to be happening in Kansas, but it's happening to people who we consider the masses. And the other was at this men's gathering, Sacred Sons Convergence, where again, like these are men from ordinary walks of life who were doing deep healing. And I'm like again and again, I'm like, man, if it can happen to this guy, it can happen to anybody. These were not veterans of the workshop circuit, And I also know for a fact that there are senators and governors and high military officials who are sitting in ayahuasca circles. It's happening under the surface, but you wouldn't know it because they go back to the Senate. And what are they going to do with that experience? The roles that are defined by the institution have not a lot of wiggle room. It's just like any of us going off and having a powerful plant medicine experience. And then we face the same question that the senators do of integration. How do we integrate these insights and this wisdom into a life that does not seem to easily accommodate it? What do I do with this? Right? I mean, haven't you had that experience? What do I do with this? And it's a process. Mm-hmm. It's not that it's irrelevant to life, but the experience sinks in, it begins to work on you. And over time, it does change your life. Maybe, especially if there's others around you who are in a similar process and who can validate that process and where it's taking you. But it's not like, every single person in the Senate could go off and have a powerful medicine experience and come back a week later and nothing would change right away. Mm. Yeah. So anyway, I hope I addressed. Yeah.
Okay. Can I give you 3 people?
All right.
And give me opinions. Okay. Kanye West.
Uh-huh.
All right. Yay.
Yeah. Kanye West, also known as whatever Kanye West is called these days. I think that he is metabolizing a lot of energies, a lot of different energies that are kind of hard to hold together. And so sometimes, because he's a very gifted person at channeling things into music from the collective. And so that because he's metabolizing so much energy, that energy can move him around sometimes into places that seem, a little unhinged, that kind of deviate from, and he's looking for an anchor. He's looking for a tether and grasping onto things that may not actually be that reliable. And I guess I would, and also because he's, so famous. I mean, he's part of those energies is all the projections that are loaded onto him and the judgments. I don't envy him. And, if he goes off on something and becomes unhinged and goes through that journey, then I pray for him that he will be received with welcome and love upon his return.
Thank you. David Icke.
David Icke. He is, his role is to apply a certain lens and inhabit a certain mythology about the way that the world works, and to develop that, because it is a mythology or a world story that is an important way station for a lot of people as they exit the old story and are in search for a new one. And here's a way station. And that mythology that he offers, I don't mean that mythology in the sense of it's just fantasy. It offers, it illuminates a lot about the world. And it also obscures a lot about the world. And there's a lot of truth that is unavailable from within the capital C conspiracy theory to explain the workings of the world. And there's also a lot of truth in it. And ultimately, there are world stories that contain and include the one that he offers in a much, much bigger picture.
Last one, Daryl Davis.
Daryl Davis? I don't know who that is.
Daryl Davis is a Black man who befriended members of the Ku Klux Klan. And
he is a servant of the spiritual being called the Universal Brotherhood of Man. And his soul's journey is part of a mass movement now to learn to see the divine in all human beings and to refuse the degrading stories that we are offered about our fellows. And so he's helping create the template for that, or strengthen the template for reverence, for seeing beneath the opinions, however hateful they may be, and not accepting those as who you really are.
Elon Musk.
Yeah. I've been talking about a receptacle for people's projections and judgments. He's kind of a mythic figure in the sense that he's larger than life, which makes him a projection screen for, all kinds of archetypes that people associate with him. He's somebody who's very adept at holding a reality for others to step into. That's how he creates these companies. When he says something shall be, people believe him. And I wrote one essay that referenced him quite a lot. That if most people, if you say, well, what's the future going to be like? They take that as an invitation to predict. Whereas Elon Musk will take that as an invitation to create. Oh, I'll tell you what it'll be like. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what's going to happen because I have agency in this. So one reason that he's so appealing to people is his strong embodiment of sovereignty, of agency. Sovereignty meaning, actually, the word actually means above the king, above rule, above the reign. So sovereign is super, right? Super reign. Like, so you're not a subject. And that kind of, and there's, I'm sure, many, many other dimensions to his personality. I've never met him, but I know people who know him. And I'm sure I know that he's a complicated person, et cetera, et cetera. But, as a public figure, as a mythic figure, this is, and as a human being, this is one of the things that he brings to the world as a reminder of our agency. And, he doesn't, in my opinion, he doesn't always use that for good things that I support and that are part of my vision of the future. And sometimes he does. But it's but his appeal, his charisma is because of his embodiment of that principle of sovereignty. He has no problem being here and saying, here's how it will be.
Aspen, do you want to throw one in there, or you want to go on with your question about?
Oh gosh, do I want to throw one in there? I don't think I have one off the top of my head. I'm just really enjoying this. The Kanye West. Wow, that really blew me away. The metabolizing of energy, that feels so true when I hear it, and I just love this.
Let me tell you how I'm doing what I'm doing here. It's really simple. I just find a part of me that loves these people. The true nature of someone is only available through love. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of projections, of one's own shadow. But if you find the part of you that loves them, then you can see so much more. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That actually feels like a segue into one question I had wanted to ask you at the beginning of this call, just in light of the theme of relationships and scarcity. When I was traveling to these different farms, regenerative farms, and learning more about biodiversity and symbiotic relationships, I remember something popping into my head about what you said about nitrogen fixing bacteria and how they're not directly benefited from nitrogen fixing itself, but rather it's the fruit, and then the fruit that has the fungi, and then that's what they benefit from. And I wanted to ask, and maybe this is it, the answer of coming to love, what tools have supported you, or what practices have helped you along the way in those moments where, yes, I'll explain. As I see it, the human brain can understand, I'll get fungi out of this, right? So being able to follow our gift versus following the incentive or output. Like, I think so much harmony is created from just following the truth, the alignment to our own truth. And this comes back to what you were saying, Christina, about even being of service. I think that for at least what I've discovered is that after being a part of various initiatives that were like, save the world, save the planet, ecosystem restoration, I'm just like, I don't know if I'm doing this for the alignment to self or for just propagating some idea that I am of value in this world, wanting to validate that some way. And now I'm in this space of, gosh, maybe I just want to paint and be in conversation with people I enjoy. Right? Yeah. And that feels like following the gift. Really, that feels like, full harmony with self being the root of harmony with other, and then harmony. And
who knows, maybe just
everything.
Doing that actually brings more healing to the world than any of these, because maybe that painting or that conversation instigates something, right? So here's my oh, I'm sorry, continue. I have.
Well, sure. Yes. And thank you. And I really do feel that, the more aligned we are with our truth, the more power there is and not power in these conditioned ideologies, but just love. And I wonder in what you stated before of, the Aya ceremony or a plant ceremony, what's my intention? And some of my intentions to be liked. And if you're sitting with somebody in relationship and you notice all these other intentions coming in, or in any context of relationship, what tools or practice have you used to come back to following the gift, following the truth, rather than following the output or motive? Because I find that's incredibly difficult as a human, as someone myself who learned and navigated business. Once I started learning the rules of the game, I was like, okay, cool. I guess I can play this game. This is how it works. Fine. And so it's so easy for me for a while when I was meeting people, business ideas. Oh, cool. Here's how you go. Here's how you get the output. Here's how you do the thing. And I find that in intimate relationship, that can be disconnective or create codependency when we abandon self for other. And so just as a personal question, like, what are the tools? What have you come back to align yourself to the gift rather than to the conditioned incentives? So
what you're asking for when you ask for tools is not something really that tools are going to give you. It's something that information will give you. Then that will start a process by which you will develop the tools, if you even need to. And the information, here's a piece of the information. So what you do, you have this brain that can make predictions about what's going to help and what's going to harm and causes and consequences and so forth. And, if we convert to regenerative agriculture, it'll sequester this much carbon, et cetera, right? And here's my grand plan to save the world, right? That whole thing, that eventually that it can become a tyrant that cuts you off, as you were saying in the relationship example, it can cut you off from your heart and from yourself. Yet this function of the brain is important. So the way it's supposed to work is that you, with your intellect, you take in all of the causes and consequences. You take them in, they settle down into the heart where they're digested, or actually maybe even down into the gut, and they're digested. And then they become instinct. And you act from that. You act from the digestion of all of this information, trusting that your choice, that the choice that your heart makes, incorporates all of that information. Your mind might not be able to justify why the heart, knowing all of this, still chose to make paintings. But you trust that. Because making choices is not what the mind is good at. The mind does not really know what to do, except to do these cost-benefit analyses and these rational. I mean, you can't live life like that. Like, what would happen if you tried to live your love life according to some kind of cost-benefit analysis?
I mean, I would say that I was definitely taught to do that.
Because we're in this money world, where that's how you do make decisions, supposedly in business, at least in economic theory, that's how. And in a scientific worldview that says only quantity is real, but that's a whole, anyway. But yeah, that's the way it should work. It's a trusting of yourself to make wiser and wiser decisions as your field of information grows. And that trust sometimes is challenged when the decision doesn't look like it's helping anything. Like what if your heart says, time to go on a Vipassana retreat for 10 days. And your mind's like, but there's so much to do right now. And this is a crucial moment. And I can't do that now. But it is time. But it could be the opposite. It could be that your mind says, well, you have to go to a Vipassana retreat because, you need to rest and you need to, but maybe it's not time. The mind can't know that. But the mind is important to feed the information to the fermenting vessel of the heart. And it's actually, well, anyway, there's more to it, but that's the information that might become a practice.
I love the visual that gives me, and also the slowness that I feel creates space for coming from a more integrated place rather than reacting to any specific piece of information. And as you were speaking, when I shared, I was definitely taught to measure that way. Like, what if you approach your love life that way? And this happens often with different people I'm surrounded by. I'll give one example. My landmate said something like, oh, I would only be with somebody if he owns a home. Because she says, I also own a home and we will be able to contribute to each other in conversation and understanding. And there's something in that I understand in terms of wanting to share with another the experience of having navigated certain parts of this reality and grow together from that sharing of information. And something in me is like, I can't quite draw a line of, I will only go for someone if. And at what point is it ever coming from an abundant mindset of like, well, these are the standards and the boundaries I hold for myself, or a calculating mind that is actually a product of this conditioning. Yeah. Of measuring.
So like all of these, I'll only be with somebody who owns a home. These are these perceptions information for the heart, or are they a lordship over the heart? Do they deny the heart or do they feed the heart? When you finally do meet somebody and, maybe he doesn't own a home, but your heart says yes, but you're like, sorry. But when your landmate, maybe the process is that she fully recognizes the importance of that to her. And then she trusts. And very likely, having fully recognized that, she won't be attracted to somebody who doesn't own a home. And before she'd integrated that, maybe she would have. But now that she's integrated that, but maybe she will still. Because who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate that difference. And it's so subtle. It's so subtle because there is something in me that I know I was attracted to what she said based on having witnessed myself in relationship and my own overgiving tendencies. right? Oh, it's okay if they don't have something because I have all the things. Oh, it's okay.
Right.
Oh, I can, and I realized the benefit and the adjustment, that boundary, she said, made of, again, the story I tell myself about myself in the choosing of something, of, right, okay, I am a vibrational match for someone who also has created safety, whatever that looks like for them. And that's different than wanting to be a vibrational match for saving or helping or aiding.
Right.
Yeah. So just working through those subtleties of where is it coming from?
Yeah. And,
really.
and as you take that insight into yourself, who you are as a chooser changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then your vibration changes. Yeah, what you're summoning in. Mm-hmm.
Wow. What a fascinating conversation. I could definitely stay here and talk to you both all day. I'll place a seed that maybe in 6 months or a year, we come back together and record another podcast together and see what comes out at that point. Charles, is there, this is where it gets to the, is there anything that you want our listeners to know?
Oh, I think everything that is meant to be said has been said. I guess I would like them to know that I am grateful for your attention and for the field of listening that makes this conversation available to the three of us to even have.
Thank you. Aspen, what about you?
We're still just feeling that statement of the field of listening that makes this available. I'm grateful to sit here. It makes me, I want to say that my experience of you, Charles, through books and information, is one thing, but I don't want to limit it with a title, but I do really feel your like medicine manship through this call. And the real devotion there is to integrating information and then really answering from a place that is love and creates more of it. It's really my honor, my gratitude, my joy to be here. Thank you so much, both of you, and to the field of listeners that make this conversation possible. Wow. To feel the interconnectedness with everything that is part of any particular sharing and moment. That feels really beautiful to move that way.
I would love to share how I view both of you are very similar. Aspen, I see the reason that you're so touched by Charles's work is because that is you. I see that he has just a few more years of life experience here on the planet and of producing and creating than you have. And I just see such deep resonance. And I imagine that there'll be some more interconnected and weavingness that happens. I do want to acknowledge that ever since throwing out the seeing Charles comment on the nightly news in whatever capacity, and then hearing your joy and excitement of like, this is a fun game when you responded to, people that are almost current events. They're humans that are actually somewhat of current events. And I think that might be a little seed in the ethers of it would be fun to experience that. Thank you all both. I will be recording an opening and a closing of this podcast episode, and it will release on Sunday evening. And I'm super, super excited to share that, and super grateful to have this experience with both of you and to be in the state of play and conversation, because it definitely felt that way.
Thank you.
Wow. Such an honor to be able to share this episode with you. Thank you all for listening. And don't you think that it would be amazing to have Charles on the nightly news corresponding, seeding that? If you're a publicist or anybody out in the world who does make that connection, let's do it. Why not? How amazing would that be? Again, if you did enjoy this podcast, please do rate, subscribe, like, follow, tune in for a future episode of Deepen with Christina. I really appreciate you all. Have a beautiful day. Bye.